This discussion covers several topics related to files and folders. It starts out with a hierarchy of data and continues with how files are named and located on a disk drive or a web server. Additional information is provided about how the computer's operating system determines which application program, also known as an app, is used to open and process data in a file. More information covers erasing files, the size of a file on the disk, file permissions, and files on the cloud. Some of you may have seen these pads of paper for important message. They have fields to put the name of the person the message is to, date, time, and a couple of fields that can be checked or left blank. The person's name field would be a text data type, and the places that could be checked would be a Boolean data type to hold a true or false. A note using a single piece of paper would be considered a record. If we collected several records and bound them together, this would be called a file. Here is a chart by Jeff Tan on English Wikipedia showing a sample data hierarchy for several employees in a company. The bit values in the byte make up the first character in his name, which is a J. Multiple characters are grouped together to build a full name, which is placed in the employee name field. The employee record for Jeffrey is composed using multiple fields for employee name, job title, and date employee. Multiple employee records are grouped together to make a file. The database links several files together. I won't be covering databases in this class. Data is stored in a disk file as a collection of bytes. In a pure text file, the bytes would represent a collection of only ASCII characters. HTML files that format web pages are pure text files. A file for a word processing program can hold formatting information such as selection of fonts, bold, colors, embedded images, etc. A file for a spreadsheet program such as Excel, numbers, Google Sheets, Calc, etc. can hold text or numeric values as well as formulas, graphs, etc. A file with audio takes digital samples of the sound at 44,100 bytes of data per second. An image file contains data that can be used to display a picture on the screen. If you zoom way into a picture, you can see that it is made up of many small dots called pixels. 3 bytes of data are used for each pixel, and there can be thousands or even millions of pixels used to make up one image. The 3 bytes of data represent the amount of red, green, or blue light needed to create one of over 16 million different colors. Most image files are compressed to use fewer bytes of data. Some image files also contain additional data to identify the photographer, the camera, etc. A video file typically contains 30 separate images for each second of data plus sound. The format for a database file can vary depending on the program that uses the file. Executable files contain code that can be run by the computer. The code in an executable file can either be actual binary codes compiled for the specific processor or be something that needs to be analyzed and executed line by line by another program called an interpreter. The file types in this list are only a sample of the most common types of files you may see. We may need to know what type and format of the data is in the file and select the appropriate program that can use that file. Files are stored on the disk using a file name. You can access a file by its file name. Most file names are followed by a period and a 3 or 4 character extension. For example, a file might be lab1.docx. The file extension .docx indicates that the file can be read by Microsoft Word or most other word processing application programs. Files are located by their file name using a directory similar to a table of contents in a book. Directory entries contain the name of the file, the number of bytes in the file, read and write permissions, and the location of the file on the disk. An operating system that displays files using a graphical user interface, also known as GUI, will show a small picture icon that indicates that the file is in Microsoft Word format. The file extension may be displayed as part of the file name, or the extension can be hidden, but it's there even if you can't see it. There are several hundred file extensions that have been defined. Here are some of the more common ones. We may run into some of these during class discussions, such as .csv, which is for comma-separated values commonly produced as a text file by a spreadsheet program. .doc or .docx was originally defined for Microsoft Word documents, but files in these formats can be read by most word processing programs. .txt files typically contain only characters and no formatting. The characters in a .txt file are usually limited to the ASCII character set. .htm and .html files contain only text characters, but can use tags defined inside open angle brackets and close angle brackets, which tell the web browser to change the format of the display, select a different font and or color, provide a link to another web page, request that an image be displayed, or several other things. .pdf is the portable document format created by the Adobe company. It is now so common that most applications can save their data in the .pdf format. .pages is a format used by the Apple Pages word processing application. However, the Pages application can also export its data into a .doc or a .pdf file format. RTF is another format used by word processing applications. However, it is not as commonly used as it was when it first came out. .gif, .jpg, and .png are the three most common formats for images being displayed on the Internet. .xls and .xlsx extensions identify that the file is in the format defined by the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet application. You may also see files created by other spreadsheet programs with file extensions such as .numbers, .calc, or .sheets. The most important thing to know is that the file extensions identify which application program should be used to process the data contained in the file. File names on a Microsoft Windows system are not case sensitive. This means that in file names, the capital A is treated the same as if it were a small a, and the same for all letters in the alphabet. File names in a Unix-based system such as macOS and Linux are case sensitive. It is like there are 52 completely different letters in the alphabet. There are 26 capital letters from A to Z and 26 completely different letters from small a to small z. Although possible, it can get confusing if you use the same name on a Mac OS for two different files but only have the capitalization different on some of the characters. Since you will probably be using different systems as you work with computers, it is best to make sure that you enter a file name with the exact capitalization that was provided. Then you don't need to worry about whether the system is MS Windows or Mac OS. The Uniform Resource Locator is also known as the URL or web address. The first part of the URL is the protocol or scheme. This tells the Internet server which program to use to process the request. The most common ones you will see are HTTP and HTTPS. This stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The S at the end is for secure. The .http and .https extensions tell the server on the Internet to use a program that works with HTML web pages. The MEL2: protocol brings up an email server. Another common protocol is FTP, which is used to transfer files between two different servers on the Internet. FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. The second part of the URL is the domain name, which identifies the name of the server on the internet. In this example, program-info.net is the address of my server. The part of the URL for the protocol and domain are not case sensitive. However, the path and file name are case sensitive on Linux web servers. Most file servers and web servers on the internet are Linux based, so be careful when you type in the web address in your browser. The file extension may be displayed as part of the file name, or the extension can be hidden. But it's there, even if you can't see it. I don't see any reason to hide the file extensions, but options on File Explorer in MS Windows or Finder on macOS can be set to either show file extensions or hide them. In Microsoft Windows File Explorer, set or unset the File Name Extensions checkbox to display the file extensions. File name extensions are not shown when the checkbox is not checked. In macOS Finder, click Finder. On the top menu bar, select Preferences and set or unset the Show All File Name Extensions. Even if the checkbox is not checked, macOS Finder still shows most file extensions. File extensions such as .ppt and .pptx can either be shown or hidden depending on the checkbox. File and folder hierarchy. In general, it's easiest to organize your files and folders to match the way you work. You might set up folders like this for your schoolwork. A folder named Introduction to CIS. A subfolder, Class Notes. Another subfolder, Assignments. Put the Assignment 1 and the Assignment 2 files in this folder. This folder structure would be organized by class, and within each class you'd set up subfolders for your notes, assignments, documents, and whatever else you need to save that's related to that class. Be careful not to get too deep with your folder and subfolder structure. Think about each folder like a door. How many doors do you want to have to open to get to a file? Don't create a sub until the number of files in the folder exceeds the number you can manage easily. There are a couple differences to notice on how a fully qualified path and file name are specified between Microsoft Windows and macOS or Linux. Microsoft Windows identifies disk drive by a letter and a colon, starting with A colon, which was the first floppy drive, now obsolete. C colon became the first hard drive. Windows systems use the backslash character as a separator between folder names and the file name. Unix-based systems such as Mac OS or Linux do not have identifiers for disk drives. These systems use the / as a separator between the folder name and the file name. The standard separator on a URL for web addresses is the /. So Microsoft had to adapt and now allows you to use either the / or / when entering a folder name and a file name. However, it always displays using the / character. When you double-click a file that has an app associated with it, it is the app that opens the file. This is known as the default app. If you want to open a file with a different app that is not the default app, right-click or two-finger click the file name and select the app using Open With on the pull-down menu. Here are instructions on how to change the default app that opens files. Be careful, you can mess up your system if you're not sure of what you're doing. On a Microsoft Windows system, to view or change the default app used to open a file based on its file extension, 1. Click the Start button on the lower left of the taskbar. It looks like a window. 2. Click Settings. It looks like a gear. 3. Click Apps. 4. Click Default Apps on the left side of the screen. 5. Scroll down to find the file extension and see the name of the application program associated with that extension. 6. If you want a different app to work with that file extension, click the current app and pick a new one. Be patient. On a macOS system, to view or change the default app used to open a file based on its file extension, 1. Use Finder to locate a file that has the extension for which you want to change its default app. 2. Right-click or two-finger click the file. 3. Select Get Info on the pull-down menu. 4. Locate the option Open With. Select the new app that will be used to open that type of file and select it. 6. If you want this to be the new default, click the Change All button located below Open With. To delete a file, select the file name and press the Delete key. In a window-type interface, the file isn't actually deleted, but placed in the trash can, recycle bin, garbage receptacle, or whatever term has been claimed by a bunch of lawyers. Files can be retrieved from this location. Usually, holding down the Shift key while pressing Delete actually deletes the file instead of placing it in the trash can. Caution: on many operating systems, actually only the link to the deleted file is changed so that it no longer shows up in the list of files, but the data is still on the disk and still can be retrieved by a disk utility. The disk utility app is a separate program that can be purchased and usually has the ability to wipe a file which totally erases the data from the disk. File size versus size on the disk. In this example, I am looking at a file named announcements.gif. The size of the file is 650 bytes. However, the size on the disk is 4096 bytes. Think of a piece of paper that only has a few words written on it. Count up the number of characters in the message, including spaces and punctuation. Each character takes 1 byte on the disk. If it was a short message that was only 28 characters long, the file size would be 28 bytes. But if the paper had room for 4096 characters, the size on the disk would be 4096. Since we have very large disks these days, we don't worry about the wasted space as much as we used to. Space on the disk is typically allocated in blocks of 4096, 8192, or 16,384 bytes. These numbers may look strange, but they are based on the progression of binary numbers which double for the next value in the series. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, 8192, 16,384, 32,768, etc. On Windows File Explorer, right-click the file name and select Properties to see information about the file size. On macOS, right-click or two-finger click the file on Finder and select Get Info. The size on the disk is indicated in KB, which means kilobytes, where a kilobyte is 1024 bytes. For example, 16 kbytes is 16 times 1024, which is 16,384 bytes. For most scientific measurements, a kilo means 1,000, but in computers, a kilo is 1024, which is the closest binary number to 1,000. File permissions. Select the file on Windows File Explorer. Right-click the file name and select Properties to see information about a file, and then click the Security tab. File permissions for modify, read and execute, read and write can be set individually for the full system, the current user, in this case it's me, Dan, or for the administrator. On macOS, right-click or two-finger click the file on Finder and select Get Info, the same as when looking for the file size. File permissions are at the bottom of the Get Info window and are set for the user, me in this case, staff in the same department, and everyone. If you are used to Linux terms, it is called user group and other, UGO for short. File lock. If we didn't have a file lock, this is what could happen. I could open a file for editing, and maybe you open the same file for editing. We each would get a copy of the original disk file in our own area of the computer's RAM memory. If I made changes to the file and saved the file to disk, my changes would be on the disk file. But when you made changes to the file and saved them to disk, my changes would be lost. Remember that we are editing a copy of the file that is in the computer's memory, not the file itself. And your copy of the file was from before when I made any changes or updates. My changes would not be in the copy when you started working on the file. Things like this were really bad, especially when working with bank records. Deposits and withdrawals were lost. Most operating systems will lock a file for editing when one person opens the file. Depending on the system's settings, another person can open the file, but only in read mode. This prevents two people from writing to a file when another person already has the file open. Cloud storage versus local hard drive. Here is a review of where files are stored for either your local machine or on a cloud storage such as Apple's iCloud, Microsoft's OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, AWS, or many other cloud storage providers. An advantage of storing files on your device is that you don't need to worry about whether you have internet access or that you have access that is good. Your files will be there even if you can't connect. An advantage of having files on a cloud drive is that you don't need to worry about losing your files if your hard drive fails. You can access your data on any device that can connect to the cloud drive, including a borrowed computer or location away from your computer. You can also use the cloud drive to back up your files. Even if you use a cloud drive, it is a good idea to back up your files and folders somewhere outside the network. The 3-2-1 rule is a great strategy for a backup plan. You should have 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, with one of those copies not located at your work area. Enjoy working with files on your desk or on the cloud. Bye. Dandolph signing off for now.